Today, we are going to be learning about adding fractions that have different denominators. If we remember, the denominator is the bottom part of the fraction. So we are going to be working with the fractions 1/4 and 2/3. And we are trying to add these two together, but we can't add them right away because one of them has 4 in the denominator and the other has 3 in the denominator. If we remember, the denominator shows us how many parts are in the whole. And if we know that one has 4 parts in the whole and the other has 3 parts, then the parts aren't going to be the same size. In order to add fractions, we need to make sure that the parts are the same size. So we need to find a common multiple between both denominators in order to get them to have similar and common denominators. So a multiple is any number that the number we're working with goes into. So for example, 4 times 2 is 8, which means 8 is a multiple of 4. 4 times 5 is 20, so 20 is also a multiple of 4 because 4 goes into both of those numbers. We want to find a number that both 4 and 3 go into. If you're having a hard time finding a common multiple between both numbers, a trick that will always work is multiplying the two numbers together. So in this case, we are working with 3 and 4. So we can do 3 times 4, which equals 12. So we know 12 is a common multiple of 3 and 4 because 3 goes into 12 4 times and 4 goes into 12 3 times. So that is a trick that will always work if you're having trouble finding the common denominator between two fractions. So our next step is to multiply the denominators of each of our fractions in order to make them into the common multiple we found. So in this case, we're looking to see how to make 4 into 12. So we need to get to a fraction that has the denominator of 12. So we need to find out what times 4 equals 12, or 4 times what equals 12. So if we remember our multiplication facts, we know that 4 times 3 equals 12. So we're going to do 4 times 3 in order to get 12 in the denominator. As we move on to the next fraction, we want to do the same thing where we want to end up with a fraction that has 12 in the denominator. In this case, we're working with 3, however. So we want to ask ourselves, 3 times what equals 12? Again, if we remember our multiplication facts, or we know that we just did 4 times 3 equals 12, which means that 3 times 4 equals 12. So now we know how to get both of our denominators into our common multiple of 12. So our next step is we remember whatever we did to the bottom, we do to the top. So with 1/4, we did 1/4 times 3 equals 12. So we need to do that same thing to the top. We did times 3 to the bottom, so we're going to do 1 times 3 on top. 1 times any number will always be that number. So we know 1 times 3 is 3. And now we're left with the new fraction of 3/12. 3/12 is an equivalent fraction of 1/4 because if we reduce 3/12 by dividing by 3 on both, we'll get 1/4. Now, we are going to move on to do that with our other fraction of 2/3. So again, whatever we do to the bottom, we do to the top. In this case, we did times 4 on the bottom, so we're going to do times 4 on the top. 2 times 4 equals 8. So now we're left with the fraction 8/12. which again is an equivalent fraction of 2/3, because if we go the opposite direction and divide the numerator in the denominator of 8/12 by 4, we get 2/3, making it an equivalent fraction. So essentially, we are looking for two equivalent fractions that have the same denominator. So as we found, we now have 3/12 plus 8/12. Now, we know with fraction addition, when you're dealing with two fractions that now have the same denominator, we first add the numerators. So 3 plus 8 equals 11. So this you should know from when we practiced fraction addition with fractions that have the same denominator. If we go back, now we know that we want to keep the denominator the same. So now we have 12 on the bottom, which stays the same, and 11 on the top. And our answer is 11/12. So even though this is a lot of steps, it's the best way to add fractions that have that don't have common denominators, but because we need to make them have equal parts on the bottom, and then add the tops to get our new fraction. All right. Now we can move on to practicing. So let's say in this case, we have the fractions 2/5 plus 1/2. We need to start by finding a common multiple. If we multiply them together, 5 times 2 equals 10, which means our common multiple can be 10. So we can do 5 times 2 to get 10 equals 10. And whatever we do to the bottom, we do to the top. So 2 times 2 equals 4. And now we have a new fraction of 4/10. And then if we're trying to get 2 into 10, we know 2 times 5 equals 10. Now we have common denominators because they both have 10. And whatever we do to the bottom, we do to the top. So we do 1 times 5, since we did 2 times 5. And now we know 1 times 5 is 5. So now we're left with the new fractions of 5/10 right here, and 4/10 over here. So now we add the tops. 5 times 4 equals 9, and our denominator stays the same. So the denominator will stay the same. So now we know that 2/5 plus 1/2 equals 9/10. Now, if you ever need more practice, you can come see me at lunch.